Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Contract Automation, How to Thrive in an Automated World. And this is brought to us by courtesy of Conga, and I'll be introducing our co-presenters on this just shortly. This is Tim Cummins from IECCM, and I'm actually truly excited by what's going on in the world of automation as it relates to the contracts world. I have been an enthusiast for technology in our field for a long time, and the reason for that is because as somebody who has introduced contract management functions, has led reorganizations of contract management functions, and has even designed and implemented global contract management processes in some of the biggest companies around the world, it's always been to me a frustration that so little of our work has really been technology enabled. In fact, far too often it seems like it's been technology disabled. And I think as an observation across the years, I have to say that with each historic advance in business automation, the power and influence of the contracts and commercial function has often tended to decline. And I think that's because in large part it has been condemned to being a largely manual process. Yes, I understand we probably all use email and we're probably great at Excel as well, but it has been largely a manual process in what has become increasingly a systems-based world where people have much greater quality of data, much more streamlined data flows. So now we're entering a world of digitization, and for the first time, I'm really seeing contract management software solutions that are transformational and can be transformational for us as professionals. So let's move on from there, and let's just introduce who it is that we're going to be talking with today. So Doug, if we can just perhaps move to our next slide. I think that will give us a sense of, well, I suppose this reinforces the point I was just making, that the way that people work is changing. And certainly customer expectations are changing, but of course, so are executive expectations changing. And the drive for things like much more oversight and appreciation, for example, of supply network performance, the need for much greater integration and integrity across complex business environments is something that we all need to keep pace with. And certainly for all of us on the call, we have to be very conscious of what our competitors are up to, because many of them, as we'll touch on as we go through today, are actively implementing exciting new systems, whether that's artificial intelligence, whether it's blockchain, whether it's natural language processing, or whether it's advanced analytics. Many experiments and implementations moving at a tremendous pace across the IECCM membership. Okay, so maybe the next slide is going to be the one that tells us about Doug and our presenter today. So again, if we could just move forward a slide.
Actually, Tim, we don't have those on slides for the audience.
Oh, well, that's fine then, in which case you don't need to show me it, Doug. I'll keep on calling for that one. Well, my own resume I'm not going to introduce. I'm sure most of you are aware. I'm as a Chief Executive Officer at IECCM. And Doug Rabacki is a Vice President with Conga. So Doug, I'll let you just give a little bit of your background, which I know has been extensive now in the whole area of the contract management software industry.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Yes, this is Doug Rabacki. I've been with Conga for almost 2 years at this point. And prior to Conga, I was at DocuSign for 5.5 years, where we had a lot of interaction around how contracts get executed, but a lot of it came into play around the workflow around contracts and how documents get generated for contract purposes and how they get negotiated. And before that, I spent a number of years with LexisNexis in a lot of legal documents, including contracts. And prior to that, with a Texas court system. My entire career has been around document-based processes, business processes, and primarily those being legal documents and inordinately contracts. And also with us is Marilyn Sellier. Marilyn has been in the contract management industry for 13 years in a number of companies, well-known companies in the contract management space, helping customers identify how to move forward with selecting a contract management system, how to deploy it, and how to get the most bang for their buck. So, Tim, thank you so much for inviting us to participate today. I am very excited about the opportunity to chat about what we're doing and what's going on in the industry. And I'm really honored to have my esteemed colleague, Marilyn, with us today. As part of Conga's growth over the past couple of years, she became part of the Conga family through an acquisition of a company we bought, Novatus. And I've just really enjoyed working with her. She had a great perspective on the market and the industry and the applications at play. And as I was talking about my experience around managing products and in our space, I've had the great fortune to be around a number of products that were all about that process of managing document-based business processes. And it always resonates around how the data and the work flow through those systems and around those systems. And without really honing in on how that data and the work gets processed, you don't get the insights and you can't manage the automation around it. So I think those are a couple of the key flows or topics that we'll talk about throughout the day today. So let's go ahead and get started. One more comment I want to make on this particular slide is I had the great fortune of working with Keith Krach during his tenure at DocuSign as the CEO of DocuSign. And on his first day as CEO, one of my colleagues asked about what was going to change. And his answer was, the one constant will be change. And, you know, with a rapidly growing business like that, but all of our businesses are subject to all kinds of forces of change. You have internal forces like the drive for profitability and the drive for more efficiency and innovation. And then there's, of course, these external factors, customers driving you to specific behaviors, competition challenging you on different behaviors, and, of course, regulatory change. So the key comment here that we want to drive people to action is be ready and find those tools that can really help you drive that change management and innovation around what's happening in your industry. Let's take an example or two here around people who maybe failed to see and adopt the change that was happening around them. There's been a lot of digital revolution going on over the last 20, 30 years around the internet and how data is being managed and how traditional things have become non-traditional. So for example, let's have Marilyn talk a little bit about Kodak, and then I'll talk about Blockbuster.
Well, thank you. And, you know, I'm very pleased to participate in this panel today, very excited about the topic, et cetera, as well. So, you know, the logos that we're seeing up on the screen are definitely part of things that, you know, I've had very much so in my life. And Kodak, you know, being a heavyweight in the analog film business, I mean, Kodak moments and really capturing a lot of my life, got left behind because they refused to adjust to the digital world in film. And there's actually an interesting article from the Harvard Business Review that points out that the first digital prototypes were actually developed by Kodak in 1975. But spotting something and taking advantage of it are not necessarily the same things. Doing something, promoting it, and going forward with it. And unfortunately, Kodak missed the boat not only on the digital, but in some other ways. Obviously with the digital cameras, but also how people started using their phones and the cameras in the phones, and disrupted changes to how the users were sharing photos and also sharing views. So, you know, definitely something that we have seen, you know, quite a decline in that brand logo over the course of time.
Yeah, so another great example is that Blockbuster logo. We used to see that Blockbuster logo all over our neighborhoods, all over the country. And interestingly enough, the primary thing that changed underneath them was how the internet was being leveraged by an upstart called Netflix. In fact, the founders of Netflix sought out and had a meeting with the executives at Blockbuster back in 2000 to propose a partnership to the current CEO of Blockbuster. The idea is that Netflix was going to run the web-oriented version of the Blockbuster brand. They built the infrastructure and the way to make all of that happen. Blockbuster didn't just say, we're not ready for that. They thought it was just not the right idea whatsoever. And so they unceremoniously dismissed them from the building and had a brand new competitor that they didn't necessarily think was going to be a challenger. Blockbuster is now out of business, and Netflix is now one of the most commonly known names around the entertainment space. And not only have they dominated how people view movies, but they also now produce movies and television shows that Blockbuster never had that opportunity. So they've grown that business and innovated over time.
If I may just comment, Doug, Marilyn, I think the points you're making are critically important. And one of the things that we're hearing from our members increasingly is that it isn't actually technical invention which is the reason for typically is the reason for the rise or decline of businesses and industries. It's actually commercial innovation. In other words, the irony is, in many ways, are you closing those product ideas with appropriate routes to market, appropriate terms and conditions and contracting models? As you rightly said, whether you look at Kodak or whether you look at Blockbuster, it wasn't that they were not aware of the potential of new technologies. They were not blindsided by them. What they failed to do was to develop new relationships with the market. And I think this is, of course, in large part what's driving a dramatic growth and increase in executive interest in the quality of their overall contracting activities, whether that's streamlining the whole process so that you're not left behind and spending all your time on internal battles, or whether it's really enabling the sort of data and information flows you need to be able to identify what are the winning offerings.
Great point, Tim. That contract and commercial management is a key factor for them to be able to understand how would they modernize their business to deal more directly with those end consumers in a different way.
Well, I remember having conversations with Blockbuster, actually, which have not gone public, back in, I think, 1994, around a lot of the transformational technologies that we at IBM could see happening. So they'd had several bites at that particular cherry and failed each time. And of course, as your next example shows, IBM came pretty close to that same failure by its refusal to recognize the decline of the mainframe.
Right. Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of more positive examples here, a couple of brands that continue to thrive through some innovation. And in some ways, IBM continued to thrive by deciding some of those things are an element of the past rather than of the future. And they've migrated through their innovation. They sold their laptop computing division to Lenovo, for example, and de-emphasized mainframes and mini computers in lieu of more services-oriented businesses. And they continue to have one of the most interesting and useful artificial intelligence engines with Watson. And in fact, recently, in the past couple of months, IBM with Watson has partnered with Salesforce to have Salesforce's version of artificial intelligence called Einstein work together to make additional value available to their customer base. So Marilyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Coca-Cola story?
Well, sure. And, as another, huge icon and household name here, I mean, obviously Coke has evolved from origins, starting in pharmaceuticals, which is, interesting, and embrace that AI technology that Doug just mentioned in many areas, leveraging the Salesforce Einstein in advertising and marketing, and also really taking advantage of some of that information. Einstein can actually interpret a visual inventory. So, think of taking a digital picture from over, one of the 16 million coolers that they have at retailers and different stores, and using Einstein to combine information to, predict based on, previous volumes that were ordered, seasonal variations, it's summertime, we're all thirsty, hot and thirsty, or upcoming promotions or events, March Madness, etc., to automatically identify and calculate a restocking order. They've also leveraged that as far as feedback into their own processes to identify different type of products and flavors that are not really, performing well from that particular market inventory as well, providing what they're calling a kill switch at Coke. So really embracing it and leveraging to, the next level of technology and automation.
Thanks, Marilyn. So automation is already here. It's coming to more and more of our businesses. We're going to talk about a little bit about are you ready and how do you make yourself ready. So according to Forbes, 38% of enterprises are already using AI technologies. And in fact, as consumers, pretty much all of us are using it in probably a number of ways. 62% of those companies, also surveyed by Forrester, will plan to begin using AI in their businesses by 2018, in the next year and a half. And a similar publication by The Economist, 39% of people around their digital transformation efforts are seeing an improvement in their real-time transactions. 32% are saying it's helped them make strong progress in improving the efficiency of their operations. 28% are saying that it's helping them acquire new customers and modernize how they're doing business, including a third of those saying that it's helped them create new sales channels. And another quarter of that audience said that it's helping them improve product development. So to reference our friends here at IACCM in a recent paper conducted by them around a study, 10% of the respondents have implemented digital systems to streamline their contracts, and yet over 50% don't even have plans to do so. So Marilyn's going to tell us a couple more points of interest around what's going on with that survey. And Tim, please feel free to chime in as we go through. This is your work product. We found it fascinating and useful as how we run our business as well.
Well, from my perspective, I really found this information really enlightening and kind of shocking from the standpoint of those particular values. And for me, identifying, the problems that occur from not really having implemented a system and also, plans not to provide that are really, far reaching. Areas that you would kind of try to use to identify from simplistic information such as, do I have the current contract that we're looking for? How do I access that information? Are we working from our best terms? Are there penalties being involved in the application? Not having that type of visibility is, or having an automated method of finding that information, to me is really, a huge benefit and an easy win from that perspective. What are those particular prohibitors that are causing people to, not embrace this technology? Is it the fact that, IT is not involved or available, that they don't have the resourcing or the budget to implement systems? There's so many systems now that have streamlined the way that they are implemented to get you up and running very quickly. Is it the fact that, the functionality that they're providing is not in sync with the needs from commercially available off the shelf, or, factors that they need to integrate with other applications with that? I mean, Tim, I'm kind of interested in hearing what, the results of this particular survey, when that was actually delivered out, what type of feedback and what information were you getting back from looking at this? What type of problems do you see?
Yeah, well, that's a fairly long story, Marilyn, so I'll try and keep it to a brief version. I mean, firstly, I think the statistics, you're showing on the screen here are obviously really concerning, but I think they're a little bit misleading. Because as we dug behind these numbers, we found that actually quite a number of the companies where people were saying, nope, there aren't any plans, there are actually plans. It's just that the contracts group isn't necessarily that involved in them. So I think as part of digitization programs within many companies, there's a lot going on which perhaps the operational resources are not even aware of. Certainly, we found a growing number of CIOs were increasingly appreciating the importance of the contracting process, of the management, particularly of supply ecosystems or supply networks, because of course the performance of the CIO themselves is increasingly dependent upon the performance of their supply base. No longer are they buying in those bits of hardware and tinkering to put them all together. You know, increasingly the CIO's mission is to manage this world of continuous change, and many of them are doing that increasingly through the use of external providers, integrators and others. So we're beginning to see an emergence often of IT groups becoming almost more like commercial functions than technology functions. So there was a lot, I think, hidden behind these numbers. Now, there wasn't any disguising the fact, however, that the investments that most have made in the past in seeking to automate what was traditionally seen as a rather more administrative activity have not been particularly successful. And I think, you'll know from the report we produced that implementation levels have often wavered, use across the business is quite limited, user adoption, and also tremendous disappointment when it comes to really the integrity of data flows, that too often the contract management system is operating in virtual isolation of many of the other areas of the business. Equally, the systems that have been made available have been, if you like, far from intelligent. And unfortunately, very often they've tried to apply a system that was designed for one thing into a very different type of relationship set. So I think, as we all know, as you look at most companies, and so one of the few where there's been a reasonable degree of success is probably in an area, for example, like retail, where there are a high volume of very similar forms of relationship. So you can have a fairly standardized system covering a very high proportion of the contracted relationships. But for many other businesses, they of course deal with a much more diverse portfolio of contract and relationship types. And the systems that have by and large been produced in the past were not sufficiently adaptive.
Oh, excellent.
Thanks, Tim. So I think as we dig into some of these later on, we'll be talking to some of the pitfalls that were mentioned in that report, which I thought were really interesting and elucidating. So as we talk about what we're going to go through next, when you're not taking control of your contracts and how they're flowing through your business, in fact, you're seeing your contracts are working against you. Creating an effective automation set of rules is a necessity, and as contracts are a critical component of business, but are complex to create, difficult to negotiate, time-consuming to manage, and often they just create bottlenecks and slowdowns. Poor contract management can lead to a lot of lost work time, or more spent on administrative and trivial tasks rather than focusing on the business objectives. They can slow down your contract and business cycles, and it can slow down your time to revenue. You can lose control of your business that you're trying to manage, and actually can introduce risk rather than mitigate risk. So some of these come into the basic problems that we see in paper-based and non-system oriented approaches to contract management, where you have lost contracts. Some of them get damaged, they're incomplete, they get lost in systems even. You may have them in random storage. They may be locked away in somebody's file cabinet and they're away on vacation. And then inevitably there's business reasons that you need to do something more interesting with that set of contracts that really drive the need for a contract lifecycle management system. So some of these examples are around if you have an audit and you have to produce those contracts in order to let the auditors review those, and how your business obligations are being managed both from a sell side and a buy side. Confidentiality, how you're managing your real estate, for example. Acquisitions, where you may have been acquired by another company or you may be acquiring another company. You need to produce all those documents to demonstrate that you understand what's going on with your business, where your obligations are. You also may have a change in a standard term. You may have moved your headquarters from one state to another state, and the governing law changes, and you need to update a massive set of agreements to amend your governing law clause. You may need to update the service level, or you may have had a service level incident, and you need to understand what are the various versions of the service level agreement that you've agreed to with oftentimes your most important and largest customers. If you don't have all these contracts in a system where you can essentially treat all that contract language as data and look for consistencies and variability in those, you're not going to be able to accomplish these tasks in any kind of reasonable way. What you need out of a contract management system is to be able to implement repeatable, consistent workflow steps and approvals. You want to manage the renewal process and timing in a more effective way, so you don't miss any of those opportunities. Oftentimes, those renewal processes have penalties attached to them. And then, as we're talking about doing more with less and changing the way we behave, our executives are always looking for ways to identify where things are slowing down in the process. And if you don't have all that instrumented in a system, you're not going to be able to analyze that and provide any salient answers to it. So one last point here, as you're thinking about how you implement contract management, how you evolve your contract management behaviors, 2 key points around implementation. One is look at your processes overall and modernize the way that you're managing your processes, not just applying technology to the same old process. Innovation is technology and process. And then ensure that you're looking for not only the short-term gains, but also the long-term gains as you dig into the depth of functionality around these applications. All right, so this is a common thread I hear when I'm talking to our customers and prospects. We're being faced by typically an increasing volume of contracts around our businesses, especially in a growing business. That's kind of an obvious conclusion. We're also seeing compliance requirements go up, and the cost of doing nothing is continuing to go up. So Marilyn, why don't you talk to us a little bit about...
Exactly. And so, what we've been looking at with, some of the things with intelligent automation, and, I might just kind of step back to, give some illustration of those points with the customers not really moving into this area, just from my own personal experiences, having people within a client that was in a highly regulated industry that had, commitments to several regulations, not only applicable to themselves, but also associated with their integration partners and suppliers. And they were required to do an audit of those risks on all the contracts involved. But because they did not have that information at their fingertips and it was not captured, it actually took them 3 man-months to surface that information. So, when we're talking about benefits of that, that's an easy ROI to bring to the table right there. Preferred Hotels has a great story, and this is something that you can find from our website as well. They're a luxury hotel company that manages membership agreements for over, 800 hotels in 22 countries. And after implementing the system, they could generate automatic reports from those contracts that are going to many different departments, including their accounting systems or their accounting departments that are doing quarterly audits. So in this case, the bonus here was that they were able to identify over $800,000 in missing billings against those properties with their marketing fees that occurred over the last 4 years. And so the great news from that perspective is, based on that one instance of investigation, they were able to recoup over 3/4 of that revenue, and easily, validate their use of automating systems and incorporating that into their CLM. So, what we're looking here is that, we've talked through some of the changing world, how companies, are needing to evolve, and, what they're doing now is bringing that into the contracting environment. Citing a 2016 Statement of Digital Transformation from the Prophet, companies that are implementing intelligent automation are really seeing increases in their market share, up to 41%. Customer engagement in their digital channels, because that is the way that we're working now, 37% increase, as well as their own employee morale and satisfaction. Think of how you work. You're expecting digital information and digital access to data, as well as greater mobile and web engagements from different constituents, and increasing customer revenue. So, those are the things that, people are seeing just with companies that are starting to address intelligent automation. But we're pushing that more into the contracting world. And I wonder, Tim, do you have, any comments on what you hear from your own members that are looking at this area?
Yes, I think it takes, as you would expect, quite a wide variety of forms. It may be that it's just about this need to be more flexible, to demonstrate greater collaboration and understanding of your market. So, for example, building a much more intelligent front end into the selling or buying process, so that you have developed and produce terms and conditions that are appropriate, that can flow through seamlessly. So we've been using, for example, as experiments with a number of our members, intelligent analysis that helps them to understand, let's say, for example, in a master services agreement, the variations that you're going to need, depending on whether you're selling into, say, the finance sector, the automotive sector, or retail. Because the environment, as you've been highlighting, is different and is in some respects increasingly different. So what's different and what's the same? How do you make that process seamless, uncontentious, and therefore dramatically faster? So that would be one example. I think other examples we're seeing are, again, just this use of intelligent technologies to understand norms and standards. Member companies certainly are working with us more and more, wanting to know, how do our terms and conditions stack up relative to those of competition and general market norms? Are we better? Are we worse? Are we pretty much on the mark? There's a growing impatience with the innate complexity of a contracting process that is still, in many respects, based on, to be blunt, relatively medieval concepts of production. It slows down the business. And, the examples you gave of immediate ROI, Marilyn, are important and, of course, very easy often to capture and measure. But in fact, the innate cost of complexity in contracts, with the difficulty that it creates in people understanding them, in the shortfalls on performance, the number of claims and disputes that tend to get generated, the opportunity here is enormous, and certainly we're seeing more and more companies awakening to that point.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So a couple notes from our executive teams. How often are we hearing from our executive teams, do more with less? I hear this from our customers. This is a really strong point around the contract managers in our companies. I don't hear from any of our contract managers who are our users that they're ever going to get another colleague in the same discipline sitting next to them. They have to figure out ways to automate to survive. And our executive teams are also asking us, what are the things that we can figure out based on the lifeblood of our business running through contracts? We should be able to gain a lot more insights out of how our business is working. What are the patterns and practices that we see evident? Where do we see variations and consistencies across our contracts? help us identify the risks earlier in the process, hopefully during the negotiations process, so we don't commit to something that has a business risk, and then help us manage what happens as the contract gets executed and we hand it off to our implementations and operations team so that we are managing all of our obligations and processes effectively. And for goodness sake, those things that we want to renew, let's make sure that those get renewed properly and timely. I'm going to talk a little bit here about what we see around our prospects coming to us and what they typically are asking for. We see people wanting just to make sure that they can have access to all their documents. And this is an analog to the traditional capability maturity model as applied to contract management. And there are a number of these around the contract management space. And they're fairly similar. Once we have all those documents in a repository and you can start to find things reliably, hopefully they're all indexed. And by having all that data around what those documents contain in them and who those business arrangements are with, you can start to conduct some good reporting and analytics around those. And then this is where we hope to get our customers really rapidly, is let's start to define the patterns and practices of how you operate. And automation is really beginning to kick in and deliver some good benefits across these last two. There are definitely benefits of having everything in one place, but when you start to have the patterns and practices laid out, so when you create a contract, it goes by all the behaviors that your legal and business teams want to have as your preferred clauses in there. When you need to have a consistent flow around, has this document been reviewed and approved by all the appropriate people? Setting that up in a contract management system so that you have those flows happen consistently and regularly, and you've got the proof points along an audit trail that make sure that everybody understands that. And then managing the negotiations process so that it's clear and evident where there's changes to the document. You have all the versions of the documents in one place with clear ability to see the pattern of how things changed in a clause from each side of the parties as you've come to close on that particular clause. And then over time, the integrations to your business systems like an ERP or a sales management system or electronic signature system, you start to get more benefits and certainly more automation. The flow of data and the flow of activity gets more robust. And the last point on all the capability maturity models is around refining all the business processes and the data processes you've got going on in your system, optimizing those so that the entire life cycle is instrumented. You can continue to automate and build more intelligence into those processes. You build up trust through the capability maturity model so that you feel comfortable that when you automate something, it's going to deliver better and more consistent results than manual processes. Marilyn, do you want to add anything here? What do we hear from our customers and prospects?
What I hear lots of times is, the first two elements are, easy to attain in a direct implementation, and then probably the next step that I see people really reaching into is the creation and flow. I would really like to see, and I think this is, a comment of getting into the integration model, because this is where you're going to get a lot of feedback and benefit. And this is also where I see a lot of things kind of being pushed into phase 2, phase 3, and maybe never coming back into the forefront. And, I would just say that that's something that should be budgeted for, should be planned, should have sponsorship to be able to get you to over that next hurdle.
All right. Talk to us a little bit about how you're seeing automation come into play with our customers.
Well, this is true because the systems that we're talking about, as Tim mentioned, are, evolving and providing you with some of the automation that you can take advantage of. And of course, one of the core requirements I hear is visibility. How can I find those agreements? How can I find information that I'm looking for? And not necessarily that I'm a database guru, that I'm looking for different data, or I even know what I'm looking for, but the systems being able to provide you information back on input, I always call it my stream of consciousness, being able to just type in information and having the system being able to provide me that view from indexed information it's done for me. I'm also seeing a huge increase in demand for automation in self-service to really realize the resources and leverage your valuable contracting resources and environments, pushing some of that functionality out to business users by the use of guidance and guardrails that are inside the application. So whether those are wizards, expert systems that are kind of evaluating different criteria, but taking that low-hanging fruit of non-disclosures, BAAs, many MSAs can be, in that particular loop to really kind of expedite and get that information through. So, I hear that a lot. Also with, providing a feedback loop in negotiations. Let's get that information back and have those negotiations really more visible to me. What am I negotiating, and what does that mean to me in context of the value of the terms that I'm negotiating, the clauses? What is that causing me as an overall risk management? The ability to not only have that information as far as streamlining, but also the ability to make sure that you're doing a true up or a reconcile of those changes back into the system itself. You want to ensure that the record is in sync with the document in sync with the record, so you can leverage that information in your searching. And of course, more and more people are adhering to controls and compliance as far as workflow processes to automate and identify where the contract needs to go and provide you visibility as to who has it, where is it, and how long. All of that, the systems can really start to evaluate those particular areas to take out that, individual hand touch on each one of those stages. It also provides you with the audit trail for your process improvement and compliance. And I think business intelligence runs across everything. To be able to evaluate that contract, not only provide trends and insights, but as I mentioned before, relative or even non-monetary value that you may have about that agreement. You negotiated, exclusivity. What is that worth to your company? Where is that available for me? And I kind of illustrated some of the business use cases where that comes into play.
If I may just add a couple of quick examples to that. I think those were absolutely spot on, Marilyn. That issue of getting more to the front end and understanding better how we drive better compliance and reduced risk through better understanding of our market and through greater enablement of the business unit. And the two quick examples I'd like to give: one big telecoms company that, for example, realized that they needed to move away from rigid templates. So in that process, they developed a portfolio of term standards and term options, but they facilitated the production of and use of a proposed agreement that was first time in line with the client's size, industry, and broad expectations. And what they discovered, they also did some contract design simplification as well to make the whole thing look more attractive and improve its understandability. And in the first year of implementation, they've seen a reduction in the demand for negotiation of just over 60%. Now you can imagine how much that's saved time, saved money, and is a great, great story of a proactive contracts function, or in this case actually legal function, that was driving that sort of change. And we see more and more of that type of story coming through. I think, on the counter side in the procurement space, again, trying to move away from the rigidity of templates that are often frustrating to the supplier often cause the supplier actually to have to increase their prices because of the risk inherent in an inappropriate contract. So this ability for the contracts function to increasingly work with the business unit, understand where the major areas of delay and risk are occurring, and then use systems to tailor agreements much more appropriately to the nature of the acquisition or the nature of the sale.
Thanks, Tim.
Now, in this area, really, kind of an example of where that application can be applied, and I think, Tim, it kind of dovetails right into what you were discussing is, how things are done currently. You're using your standard and best positions and, your initial draft, and then that information comes back into a revised format. And, the final view that we've got over there is really kind of like your red line of what those changes are. But Doug, what are those changes? What is the impact of that information from an intelligence perspective?
So what happens when you implement the tools around artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing against a scenario like this? The system will help understand exactly where the changes are, but that's the easy part. What happens is that you'll see the machine learning will look over the patterns of many contract negotiations and understand the use of clauses and help identify that a risk is in the change between striking all and inserting most. That's a business risk that's been inserted into the agreement. And then it also understands the difference between the striked out portion of the courts of Hawaii versus the more formal version of this about being governed by the laws of the state of Texas. It'll help you understand, are those standard clauses? And if it's not a standard clause, what types of risk does it insert for you? And how does it fit with the types of things that you've accepted before in negotiations? What we're seeing is the technology around these things provide great answers, business solutions to these problems that oftentimes are difficult and challenging. It helps steer your business people to the right points and focus on the most important elements of it. Now, you'll have lawyers that will want to make sure that they understand the whole context of things, but it provides a heat map and a great way to facilitate a more expedited review of changes in the negotiations process.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, how do you drive the process improvement? I think with a CLM system, you don't make the improvement the goal. You have to continue. It's not a status quo if you put the system in and that's where that information is. You're going to be going back through and doing process improvements on an ongoing basis. Use the analytics that you're going to be getting out of the system to drive improvements such as identifying bottlenecks and weak points so that you can identify, well, hey, here are some headaches that we've identified from different avenues that you've taken. You're going to be going back in. It's an iterative process of enhancements and improvements. And that can also be compared to the business results that you're looking for. Where have new risks surfaced, based on the fact that the contract language failed to keep up with some of the business requirements? What do we need to start to, surface at this point in time? What type of, new areas do we need to track? And I think the ongoing of this is kind of that optimization that we talked about within the maturity model, really going back through and evaluating what you're getting out of the system and continuing to make those process improvements.
Yeah, one of my favorite customer stories over the past year was a new customer of ours came to our user conference, and we were sitting down talking about the use of their system and what they want to see different and how their implementation went, the functionality and so forth. And a person from the legal team, who was a Six Sigma black belt, was describing when they decided to go down the contract management path to implement a new system, that they spent the time first to go re-engineer their processes and design how they wanted their process flows to work and how they understood their patterns. And they did that before they decided how to choose a system and how to implement it. It was amazingly valuable to them and made for a very quick and simple implementation for us to help them. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing from our customer base. So the traditional Conga business was very customer-centric, and as we acquired Novatus, we were looking for someone in the contract management space as a provider, but also was very customer-centric in their behaviors. The team had a user advisory council that drove a lot of interaction around what were the priorities that the customers have, and explicitly asked the customers to all be involved to help drive that. And so we've got a regular dialogue with that customer base around not just what they want, but how are things going? And so we ask them questions like, what types of agreements are you managing inside of the system? And what we see, these percentages don't add up to 100 because we see that a lot of our customers are using the system for a lot of different types of contracts. And this is a subset of one of the surveys. We don't get 100% response rate from all of our customers and participants in the user advisory council on each one. And this also provides a good indicator of how to get started. Back to Marilyn's point, one of the things that we see is customers bite off something fairly easy, like confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements. Oftentimes are one of the easiest things to implement and automate so that you get a good win early without a lot of cost and effort. And then you dig into some of the harder spaces around sales and procurement and real estate, for example. One of the other things that we ask pretty regularly is what portion of your contracts are being managed in the system? And typically we get most or all type of responses on a scale of none to all. And you see the result overall is well above 4 there on that scale. And again, back to the capability maturity model, the goal through what we're trying to accomplish with our customers is to drive as much as they're ready for it, to enable them to have the functionality in the system and the services available to them to pick up new use cases, new product or contract types, and adopt additional functionality to help them across the whole spectrum of contracts, but then adopt the depth of functionality that helps them automate as much as they choose to, or whatever point they are in the maturity model, what their comfort level is. As we're getting to the close here, I want to make sure we leave a couple minutes for questions. I mentioned before, Conga's focus on customer focus. We're pleased to share the stories of our customers and talk about why contract management is so important. Customer focus permeates throughout all of our businesses. The traditional Conga before the acquisition of Novatus has actually been in the business of helping customers generate contracts for 10 years, millions of contracts every year. And so as we expanded the portfolio to include more of a contract management system and then develop a more native version of that contract management system for Salesforce, we want to talk about how automation really helps. Conga's roots were in the automatic generation of contracts, but based on a lot of conditions and the deal. But you'll hear a lot of buzzwords as you go through this. So let's talk about how they really help fuel the business. So one of those buzzwords or buzz phrases is digital transformation. And really, if you think about how do we create and manage documents from data and send them along their business process, rather than sitting at a blank document in Word and creating a contract from scratch every time, that the system will understand how, based on a lot of parameters in the deal and the conditions with the business, that you want to generate that contract, and automatically generates it, and then you can fine tune it. Saves a lot of time and effort in the process, and you get more consistency out of it. And then we talked about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing. The goal here is for the system to help understand and leverage the content in documents and data so that you can have smart insights and predictive suggestions based on the patterns in those documents and data to really help drive your processes and uplift your processes so you're more efficient in how you manage the business. So with that, I think we're ready for questions. I think we just have a few minutes left. Tim, do you have any final thoughts as we're working through the questions part?
I'm sorry I started speaking, but of course I left myself on mute. So I think one of the easy ones, Doug, is whether or not people can get in touch with you and actually have a demo of the system.
Well, of course. We invite that, of course. Marilyn is actually one of our best demonstrators of our product and has been doing so for a number of years with us. We'd be happy to, and we often run open sessions for people to come and have a less formal way to kind of go up and have that without any pressure of being sold anything. So if people are interested in that, please contact us afterwards.
I think, you know, the whole issue of demos is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think we're seeing, as I said earlier, the systems that are available today are becoming much more adaptive rather than just being attempting to be one size fits all. And as I mentioned before, I think the diversity of contract and relationship types that an organization deals in, not so much its buy-sell differentiation, but actually the highly variable levels of complexity ranging from, I suppose, simple purchase orders through to potential joint venture agreements or M&A. It really is important to understand what it is you are trying to automate rather than just look for a system that will do everything. Would you say that's about the comment?
I agree, and we've taken the approach. We offer a SaaS product, Conga Novartis, and it has an immense amount of configurability. And so you can configure the system for the patterns innate to each of those types of contracts that you're trying to manage. You can set up different workflows and contract creation profiles and so forth, so that each segment of your contract portfolio gets managed in the way that makes sense, and you can manage all of them within one system. And I think that's one of the things that's really compelling to our customers, is that they don't have to go to different systems to get different strengths. They can configure that within one system.
Now, I've been having a great conversation behind the scenes here on a topic that maybe, I don't know whether it will mean much to you, Doug and Marilyn, but Kazim has been asking whether or not we see comparisons between the world of contracts and the world of BIM. Now, I don't know whether BIM means anything to you, and I'm sure some of our audience will scratch their heads, but it's building information modeling, and actually is a fascinating area, and I think a great sort of crossover to what we've been discussing. Building information modeling is using advanced technologies, digital technologies, virtual reality to come up with dramatic improvements in the specification of new buildings and the shortening dramatically on the cycle times associated with construction, much more accuracy, far less change, and therefore much greater likelihood of coming in on budget and on or ahead of schedule. And it's been a fascinating question. We were actually asked some time ago to look at the extent to which those advanced technologies that are being used in building information modeling could also be used in contract modeling. And that is a piece of work we've been involved with, which is, again, I think, leading us through to exactly what we've been talking about today, the way that automation is steadily going to transform what we do, where we do it, and how we do it. And so I think back to your original title, phenomenal opportunity coming to the contracts community from automation, but in order to take advantage of that opportunity, we've really got to open our eyes and our minds to the excitement that that automation can offer, because it will quite fundamentally, I think, alter the jobs of the average contract manager. Is that something the two of you, I suppose, is our final question, would agree with?
Yeah, so I love the idea of spotting technology as being used in other places and applying it to our space. That's something we've done before and continue to like to do. And I do see some analogy to the way you describe BIM as it relates to contracts. I think that is what the companies at the forefront of the space are doing. They're leveraging the intelligence about what's worked before and ensuring that those learnings are applied into new contract creation and negotiation. Marilyn, what's your take?
No, just listening to that, I think that there's a lot of synergy within that particular area, especially in managing relationships between different components to ensure success down the line. So I'm going to do some more research. Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Doug. Thank you, Marilyn, so much for spending time with us today. I know we've had a lot of positive feedback from our audience. Like I said, one or two were hoping they were maybe going to be getting a demo today, but obviously you're very open to doing that. And as you say, you can either access the Conga public demos if you go to their website, or of course drop a note to Doug or to Marilyn, and they'll be delighted to work with you to get something set up. Truly is an exciting area, and we're looking forward very much to continuing this discovery of how the new technologies, and particularly artificial intelligence, will continue to transform the work and the value generated from the contracts community. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
My
Tim.
pleasure.